Right now, you're about to get to see the SCA Barista Foundations as it was recorded during COVID.
Okay, we need to protect the quality of our beverage. And the way that starts is by protecting your coffee beans and keeping them fresh. So when you have a nice, freshly ground, filled portafilter, and you plan to pull your espresso shots, well, how can we know, how can we tell if we're still at optimal freshness or if we've lost some of that freshness? Here we've got our freshly ground espresso. We've got our fresh beans, fresh grind, and this is one of the first great steps in ensuring that the quality of our coffee is going to be amazing. All right, so freshness has a number of different implications for espresso. And when we prepare our espressos, when we have our coffee beans, as we keep and store our coffee beans, we want to make sure that we are always preserving and protecting the quality. It's really hard to add quality to coffee once it's been grown and harvested and processed and roasted, sent to you. At each step of the coffee supply chain, quality can go down. Quality never really goes up, right? It starts in the beautiful harvest of the farmer and then the careful picking and the processing. In each of these stages, we're just seeking to protect that inherent quality and to bring it out or to exemplify that quality. So when we're preparing and pulling our espresso shots, we want to make sure that we have a few indicators as to what constitutes a fresh or great quality espresso, and then what might give us warning that it is not so fresh or great. Do you see how thin that is? Well, these are not fresh beans. So you couldn't really tell. I was telling you a nice story and you can't really tell when you look at that grinder over there. And when I grind them up, they look fresh enough on the camera. But when I pull that espresso shot, the crema is thin. There's a flatness in the aroma, and there's just kind of this flatness of flavor. And so if I try to do latte art on top of this thin crema, it's not going to work. I can drink this, I could add, it's not a bad flavor actually. The flavor though is just one aspect. We're lacking that mouthfeel stickiness and body. We're lacking the crema on top. We're lacking the aromas. The aromas are kind of gone. The taste is still not bad, but that coffee has been in the grinder for a long time. Guess what? Someone left those beans in there and they were just sitting in there exposed to all of these bean beware elements, okay? Oxygen oxidizes and causes the coffee to go stale. Stale coffee just has this kind of flatness to it. And it comes through in the taste. My mouth has that stale coffee taste. I ground the beans fresh, but it didn't matter because the beans were not fresh. You want to keep your beans whole until you use them. We're going to look at the two different types of grinders. This is a manual grinder, and while that has some benefit, the dosing chamber on a manual grinder is a place where coffee grounds can collect, and ideally you want to use your coffee within 10-20 seconds of grinding. You don't want to grind it and let it sit for 10-20 minutes. Even 2 minutes is far too long for fresh coffee that's ground powdery fine for espresso to be sitting. So protect your beans from oxygen. Keep them in their original bag that they came in, and after you're done at your cafe, go ahead and pack them back into the original bag or into a container that is airtight, and then replace them tomorrow or the next time that you plan to brew your coffee. Sunlight, ultraviolet light penetrates, and sunlight is really powerful, and it steals from the freshness of our coffee as well. It increases oxidation. Moisture and temperature. This is hard if you live in a environment which is hot or humid. Coffee beans like to be dry and cool, just like rice or black beans or tea. So many of the other things that we just keep, and we want them to age well, we keep them cool and dry. Cleanliness, you always keep your coffee clean and consistent. So those are just some of the few rules that come across with coffee beans. Now, carbon dioxide is present in coffee. And after we roast coffee, if you've ever seen a coffee bag really expand, that's the coffee letting out its fresh carbon dioxide from the roasting. If you get coffee within 3 days of the roast, you may experience some of that in the cup. And the way carbon dioxide comes out into the cup is just like that, the bitterness of a carbonated water, right? It has this bitterness, this astringency that kind of dries your mouth out. That's why we put a lot of sugar in Coca-Cola and some of those other soft drinks, because CO2 as a gas has this bitter, drying astringency to it. Well, if your coffee is too fresh, it's going to actually, you'll pull an espresso shot and it'll have kind of this bubbly nature to the crema. It's not like a thick, creamy crema, but it can be like frothy, bubbly, and a bit astringent. So if you're wondering what's wrong with my espresso roasting and you're trying to calibrate your roaster, you're telling them you're having problems, maybe your coffee's a little too fresh. Maybe you should let it age for 3, 5, 7 days, and then just let some of that CO2 come out. That helps to pull a better espresso shot at many times, depending on the roast level.
Hey there, friends. Sorry for the interruption. Why don't you go get yourself a refill on coffee? And while we're at it, take time, if you haven't already, please subscribe or consider sharing this link with a friend. I've put out as much information as I can here on YouTube at howtocoffeepro.com and at SCA.training. Resources, tools, kits, a lot of it's free to help you and to help your friends, to help your colleagues in coffee. So if you have any questions, reach out to me directly, reach out to my team, and check out those resources. Don't forget to subscribe, add a comment, and let's get back to the course.
I warned you about leaving your coffee there. Don't do that. This is a cafe area that was closed because of COVID and because of social protocols, social distancing, and those beans were left far too long in the grinder. So roasting certainly has an impact on espresso. The way we roast coffee for brewing is different than the way we roast coffee for espresso. And that's because brewing typically requires 2, 3, 4, 5 minutes. Whereas espresso, we want to use 20 to 30 seconds. And to do that, to roast it properly for espresso, we want to make sure we fully develop the coffee. Now that's always true, but we really want to just make that coffee nice and soluble, easily dissolvable when we pull an espresso shot. Even with a lighter roasted coffee, we want to make sure that it is properly roasted. And with a darker roasted coffee, we want to make sure that it is properly roasted. But light roasted coffees, when pulled as espressos, you can put a single origin coffee in there, you can put a light roast blend in there, and those lighter roasts will have more acidity. If you're drinking your coffee and even when you pull a long, good, balanced shot, but it's still really acidic, that's probably because of the roast. If you pull a proper shot of espresso and it's dark roasted espresso, it should have more bitterness present. That as you roast longer, the acidity just naturally gets roasted out of the bean. Acidity is one of the first elements inside of the bean, the amino acids, the proteins, they are developing early on, and it gives us a very enzymatic, floral, fragrant coffee when it's light roasted, but it's also much more acidic. And it's because of that fruit nature. It has fruit acids inside of the seed. As we roast further along in the process, we are going to continue to develop the acids and the sugars. There is various forms of hydrolysis and lots of things that happen at a physical level, which we discuss in the roasting courses. And those sugars begin to caramelize and exchange with other chemical compounds inside of the bean. As the acids are being roasted out and ever changing, and the chemical bonds are also evolving, we're burning the coffee fibers, we're burning the cellulose structures, and that's why the coffee is turning brown and black, and that also increases the bitterness. Now you might hear it said before, light roasted coffees, dark roasted coffees, one of them has more or less caffeine than the other. Really, there's no change in caffeine. In the roasting process, caffeine is just, it's in the bean. Again, with Arabica, there's half as much as is in the Robusta bean. So it doesn't change, but what does change is how easy you can dissolve that coffee. How quickly it will be extracted, or how soluble it is. And you can understand, because the darker you roast that coffee, the more fragile and brittle, not bitter, brittle, it is more bitter when it's darker, more brittle it is, and so you can easily crush a dark roasted bean. You can't easily crush a light roasted bean in your hand. The more easily dissolved that coffee is, the more you will dissolve when in the presence of water. And so if for some reason with your light roasted coffee you were leaving some caffeine behind, you weren't fully dissolving your coffee and all the flavors, there's no question that you'll easily dissolve all of that material into a dark roast. So people get confused. They think, oh, there's more caffeine in dark roast because it's stronger and more bold and makes me feel alive. You know, there's lots of magic and myth around coffee, but the caffeine content doesn't change in the roast. The caffeine content, if you want more, we already learned, throw in some Robusta and you can boost your caffeine content. P.S. That's how those really high Death Wish coffee started it, but now there are other coffee chains with twice as much caffeine as Death Wish. That's how they have this claim to ultra caffeine coffee. They source coffee beans that contain more caffeine in them, and they use Robusta. All right, so some different tips to try. We're going to look at some different tips in terms of brewing espresso. I'm going to give some of these later on in the course as well. But try pulling your light roasted shots. Make sure that the way you're grinding and filling your portafilter, you're able to extract those shots just a little longer. And see if you get more of this balance and sweetness out of the cup. With the dark roasted espresso, maybe you want to pull faster shots. Not too fast, you don't want to under extract it, but it'll just, you might be able to soften the bitterness. You might try a more coarse ground coffee because it might not dissolve quite as quickly when it's coarse ground rather than being very fine ground. So there's lots to discuss here in terms of how we speed up, slow down our espresso extraction, and roasting is one of those elements. But as we just saw in the beginning here as well, the crema, the freshness is a huge impact to your coffee quality. So watch out if it's too fresh. You don't want that carbon dioxide to be coming through the beans in the brew. But generally, what we are more afraid of is the coffee going stale. So put in those good measures to keep your coffee fresh and make your coffee amazing.
Oh, hey there. So just in case I forget to tell you or you haven't seen it already, go ahead and check out howtocoffeepro.com, where we have lots of coffee classes available online for you, or www.sca.training. And you can find resources, lab tools, tasting kits, all kinds of stuff that you need to up your specialty coffee journey. So if you're not already on the email list, then you're probably missing out on some of the great options we have at howtocoffeepro.com. or at SCA.training. As always, if you leave your comments below, if you subscribe and follow, and if you join that email list, you're not going to miss out on all the great offers, the announcements, the new support and products and courses that we have for you.